In 1992, director Rob Reiner and star Tom Cruise gave the world an electric courtroom drama that pulls no punches in its search for the truth.
In 2022, we try a whiskey that embraces the heart of a traveler.
The film is A Few Good Men.
The whiskey is Nomad Outland Whisky.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we continue the Rob Reiner train that we have rolling with 1992's A Few Good Men. Brad?
It's basically the same thing as Misery.
You know, we've talked about how Rob Reiner is just kind of all over the place when it comes to genre exercises. And the same is true again this week. So now this is the fourth Rob Reiner film we've done on the podcast, and we have gone from When Harry Met Sally to This Is Spinal Tap to Misery to A Few Good Men, which, you know, just they all seem like very logical steps for Rob Reiner to take, right?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. If you're going to be moving your directorial career along, you should just jump from genre to genre as you go. It's the best move.
Absolutely. That's why everyone always says they can't pin down what kind of things Scorsese's all about, you know? It's like he made that one gangster movie that one time, but he never really returned to that genre.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes him so great.
Exactly. All right, so I don't have too much to say about this movie, Brad, other than this is just a really good movie, you know?
Yeah, that's it, man.
All right,
good episode.
Let's drink the whiskey and get out of here.
Bob, I think what I love about A Few Good Men is that you have a Sorkin screenplay just with the perfect actors to execute what he is going for on the page. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this was adapted from a play that Sorkin wrote, and it's very obviously a play. Like, this just feels like it was meant to be on the stage. The scenes are very long. They're very dialogue heavy. I mean, of course it's dialogue heavy. It's Sorkin. But even more than most of his screenplays, this feels like a stage adaptation. And what I really love about Sorkin, and he's a guy that has, in some ways, kind of come full circle and become like a parody of himself, I think, these days. But what I really love about Sorkin is that he has one foot in the present with the way that he writes dialogue and his ear for dialogue. And he also has one foot in classic Hollywood. Like there are lines in this movie that work in the context of a movie, and they work because, how do I explain it? It's almost like we know that a scene is building to that payoff line. And then every single time a scene is building to a payoff line, or, you know, if it was a comedy, we call it a punchline. But every single time the scene is building to one of those lines, he delivers.
Yeah, there's just this incredible tension that builds in each scene. And as we hit those scenes, it just feels like Tom has an ability to nail the emotional timbre of the scene every single time.
I'm sorry, Tom?
What?
Tom?
Tom?
Who? You just said Tom. Which Tom are we talking about here? Our boy Tommy C?
Our boy Tommy C.
There it is.
The one and only.
I just love that you're on a first name basis with him, and first name only. Like he's Madonna, you know, it's just Tom.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, do you want me to call him like Thomas Cruise?
No, I don't. No, you're absolutely right. This is a stellar Tom Cruise performance, and Tom Cruise is kind of a good microcosm for how I feel about this whole movie, Brad. And I promise we'll get into the meat of the episode here. I'm kind of just like going off on tangents, but up until about the last 25 minutes of this movie, I was watching it and saying, like, it does everything a movie is supposed to do, and it does it pretty darn well. Like, this is a solid 8.5. And it's it's the kind of 8.5 that everyone in the world would agree that this movie is like an 8.5, and that's why everyone loves it. But it's not.
That's why it has a 7.7 on IMDb.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not exactly like the greatest movie I've ever seen. And then the last 25 minutes of the movie happened.
Ugh.
And I said, oh, this is way better than an 8.5.
Yeah.
And I think Tom Cruise's performance kind of mirrors that for me. For most of the movie, I'm like, Tom Cruise is holding his own here and he's doing a pretty good job, but he's leaning on some of the old Tom Cruise standbys. And then the last 25 minutes happened and I was like, oh, this is one of the best Tom Cruise performances of his whole career.
Yeah, easily. I think that when he comes back to the apartment and he's drunk because, he's found out that there's spoilers ahead, Bob.
Yeah, exactly.
He's found out that Colonel Markinson has killed himself and that their entire defense has fallen apart. And, Galloway is continually trying to get him to essentially keep fighting. And he just loses his mind and ends up throwing everything off the table. He, slams it off the table and he's screaming at his coworker. And it's just absolutely electric. And you can feel the tension in the room. And it's moments like that where I'm like, man, Tom is just one of the best actors of our generation.
I'm picturing Tom from MySpace every time you do that. Man, Tom, what a good guy.
What a great guy Tom is.
All right, it is time for us to get into Brad Explains, which is America's favorite segment of this show. This is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the plot of the film that he has just seen, often for the first time. Brad, this is not your first time seeing A Few Good Men, right?
Mm-mm. No, definitely not.
How many times have you seen it before?
This was probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
I've seen it a few times before. It's probably been maybe 6 or 7 years since I last saw it, though, so it's been a minute.
Was this a cable movie for you, or was this I saw it on, VHS, or I saw it on DVD or whatever?
Bob, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I did not have cable growing up.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, no, so I never watched cable movies. I think it's why I never understood, the Shawshank appeal.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm not really familiar with movies being shown on TV.
Okay. Well, it's funny you bring that up because I do think if I'm going to compare this movie to anything today, it's going to be Shawshank because I think this has a very similar vibe just in the way it's structured. But yeah, I forgot that you lived under a proverbial rock as a child. So
yeah,
you've seen this movie 3 or 4 times and not divided up by commercials, which is, I think, crucial to one's enjoyment of this movie.
Yeah, I feel like if you had a 10-minute interval of Swiffer commercials and I don't know, but it was probably shown in the early to mid 2000s. So Axe body spray commercials.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that would really accent the movie very well.
Come on, man. When I'm watching this movie, I'm thinking of hey, you know what sounds really good right now? A Quiznos sub. And then there's a commercial for it.
Bro, Quiznos used to have this roast beef steakhouse sub that was freaking killer.
I never had Quiznos. I feel like I've missed my chance now.
I think you have. I don't know if they exist anymore.
They've been swallowed up by the Jersey Mike's cinematic universe.
No, there's a little business heaven where you can go to Blockbuster and then next door there's a Quiznos
inside of a Circuit City. Yeah. All right, dude, we are way off course. It's time for Brad Explains. We've got 60 seconds on the clock. Can you break down in a spoiler-filled fashion the plot of A Few Good Men?
Tom Cruise is just kind of a D-bag lawyer who gets by on plea bargains, but he is tasked with defending 2 Marines who have been accused of murdering one of their fellow Marines. He travels down to Guantanamo Bay to learn more about the case and has an interaction with the infamous Lieutenant Nathan R. Jessup. Colonel, sorry.
Jessup,
yeah, he very clearly wants to be called Colonel. He goes back and mounts a case to defend these men, going through all sorts of trials and tribulations in the meantime. By the end of it, the only way to prove their innocence is to get Colonel Jessup to admit that he ordered a code red, which is a disciplinary measure that's a little bit off the books. He does this in spectacular fashion, helping his clients along the way.
Boom.
The end.
Boom.
That might have been one of
that was a good one.
Mechanically one of my best.
And you came in like 8 or 9 seconds under time, too.
Yeah, that was impressive. I'm
Nicely
going
done,
to drink some whiskey to myself.
As you should. All right, man, let's jump in and let's start talking about performances because we've already mentioned Tom, as we like to call him. I do think this is one of Cruise's best performances. And, we've done a few Cruise movies on the show. I think a few weeks ago, I don't remember what episode it was, but I was talking about the slight variations that he did on the same general douchebaggy character for such a long time. And like in Top Gun, he does it one way, and then the next year he does The Color of Money with Scorsese, and it's a very different take on the same general cockiness. And he has that here, where, this is a really interesting one to hold up against Maverick in Top Gun, because at the root of both of those characters is this thing with their parents and how is it Maverick's dad is dead or something, or like his dad was like a really important flying ace and he can't live up to that. And then in this movie, his dad was a really important lawyer, but they're motivated by different things. And I think it's a really interesting study in how Cruise didn't really stretch himself in terms of the types of characters he played. But at the same time, I don't think he gets enough credit for the different shades that he brings to each incarnation of this kind of same stereotype.
I think it's just fascinating that he very clearly had some daddy issues and yet never worked with Steven Spielberg.
Well, he's worked with Steven Spielberg many times.
Oh, that's true. Minority Report.
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds.
I guess that's 2. Maybe not many, but 2.
A couple.
For sure, 2.
For sure. That's funny. I, literally as I said it, I was like, wait a second. I agree with you, Bob. I think that he brings a nuance to this character. And I think one of the things that helps the most with it is his interactions with his co-leads. I think that Demi Moore and Kevin Pollak just really bring out all of the different shades of his character that he needs to bring out. The interactions with them reveal a much deeper and kind-hearted person than you get at the very start when he's wheeling and dealing and talking about how he's going to have him doing paperwork for up to a year if you don't take this plea bargain. And the cheesiness at the start is kind of paid off with a much deeper character by the end of the film.
For sure. And you've mentioned his 2 co-counsels, Kevin Pollak and Demi Moore. And I'm going to wait to get to Jack Nicholson. But let's talk about Demi Moore for a little bit, because it is a rare thing, Brad, to find an actor who can deliver Sorkin dialogue believably. I think, at its worst, Sorkin's dialogue, or I guess the actors in a Sorkin movie, are just kind of like vessels to get the dialogue across. And there are times when the dialogue in a Sorkin movie always seems too showy, and it seems too much like Sorkin is trying to go for like these verbal fireworks. And it's sometimes really obvious. And I think that Demi Moore does a really good job in this movie, especially by the end of the film. But in the early going, I definitely noticed that she was just saying dialogue, and I was noticing the dialogue more than I was noticing her performance. I don't know if that's fair, but,
No, she's fine.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever seen a Demi Moore movie that I was, super impressed with.
Mm-hmm.
Her performance. I think that in this role, though, she does what she needs to do, in that she highlights the nuance of Cruise's performance and helps, she challenges him, which is what he needs to make him a better lawyer and a better person. And so I think she stands up for herself in just the right ways, and her performance has a tenacity to it that I think stands up pretty well when you look at the other performances, which I think are really spectacular.
All right. Kevin Pollak, I think, does a really good job in a pretty thankless role. I mean, he's just there to kind of be like the buddy. He is the goose to Tom Cruise's Maverick, like if we're being honest here. And he does a good job with it. Yeah,
he talks about his kid and says that she called him dad. And Tom Cruise is like, she's pointing at a mailbox.
Yeah, I guess that's the extent of our conversation about Kevin Pollak. So it's time for Jack Nicholson. who has entered a phase of his career here where it's kind of like Pacino, where once Pacino hits Scarface in the early 80s, he can't not be Pacino in a movie anymore. And I think Nicholson has kind of hit that at this point. You know, this is post-Batman, so he's already done the Joker thing. He is once again one of the biggest names in Hollywood. He is commanding an incredible salary. I think he gets $5 million for this movie for doing 10 days of work. And went on the record afterward and said, like, this is one of the few times that amount of money was worth it. But Rob Reiner raved about working with him, said that, when they were doing the courtroom scenes, when you're filming something, you do what's called coverage, where like, all right, we're going to get the shots of both of these guys, Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, talking with each other where they're both in the shot. But then we need to film it from Jessup's point of view, only looking at Tom Cruise. And so Jack Nicholson's off screen. And in a lot of cases, what you'll have is like a script supervisor or someone will be just reading the lines and Tom Cruise is just reacting. And he said that not only did Jack Nicholson stay and do all of his lines, but he did it in character at like level 100 the whole time. No matter if the camera was there, it is. No matter if the camera was on him or not, like he really did give his all for 10 days and got $5 million for it.
Yeah. And I guess I'll say this, man. If you're getting paid $5 million to work for 10 days, and granted, movie shoots are intense days. He's probably there for like 12 to 14 hours. But I think it's not, too much to ask for him to just go balls to the wall the entire time.
Yeah. Here's the thing. All right. So I said all that about Nicholson to say this. I don't know that he's necessarily believable as a Marine. Nicholson made his bones on being counterculture, like he was in Easy Rider, right? And all through the 70s, he played these countercultural, whether it was in 5 Easy Pieces or even in The Last Detail, where he is playing a member of the military, or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where he arrives at this, mental institution and wreaks havoc. I don't know that I... Go ahead. Sorry.
And also was, charged with raping a underage girl.
Right.
No big deal.
In that movie. This is not Jack Nicholson. This is McMurphy. Important detail. I don't know that I trust. I don't know that I buy him as a lifelong member of the military, but I do buy him as Jack Nicholson, outsized actor who is there to chew scenery and kick ass. And in that capacity, putting him up against Tom Cruise, I think what makes it compelling is like, it's not even so much Jessup versus Kathy as it is, Nicholson versus Cruise. And so like, even if I don't totally buy the character of Jessup played by Nicholson, I'm invested in watching these two actors bounce off each other.
I think that's ridiculous, Bob.
All right.
I think that Nicholson has an incredible ability to embody the best, worst part of the American military in that crude snideness that looks down on the people it protects. And I think that from what I have heard, my brother was military for 8 years. I've had some other good friends in the military. From what I've heard, there are those people who, and unfortunately, it seems like our country gets further and further away from appreciating the military, but a lot of people in the military feel that distance and feel further and further from wanting to listen or care for the people that they're protecting. And so I would honestly say that in my mind, the character of Nathan Jessup, played by Nicholson, is eminently believable.
That's fair. I mean, I guess I will say I buy Nicholson as a hard ass. And I think he's playing a hard ass here. I just don't know if I'm ever going to look at Jack Nicholson and be like, oh, yeah, this guy who wears big sunglasses and sits courtside at the Lakers games, is clearly a member of our military. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I'm so familiar with the persona of Jack now that it's hard to detach from that.
I think I would just call it the Tom Hanks effect.
Yeah.
Like, Tom Hanks is Tom Hanks, whether he's in Big or, Mr. Rogers or anything. It's just Tom Hanks. All
right. Before we go to break, let's talk a little bit about Reiner and Sorkin. And I guess I don't know, we'll go in and out of both of them. But I think with Reiner, we've talked about this already. He always knows how to align himself with a really good script and then just be efficient at movie making. Like, when I watch this movie, there's not much fat on it, and it's because it's a script that doesn't have much fat on it. But Reiner also is wise enough to know not to add a whole bunch of like extraneous details and things that don't really belong in this movie. You know, we've knocked him a little bit for not being the most artistic director of all time, but because I feel like he knows his limitations, I guess is what I'm saying, because he knows to pick a script that he doesn't have to do anything extra to, and then just direct to the script. And then you have a great movie. And it's a formula that seems to work time and time again for him because it works again here.
Here's the thing, though. I agree with you 100%, but I think when you want to look for artistic touches, I think that the opening scene of this film is actually pretty brilliant. Like, you get a solid 3 to 4 minute scene of, Marines basically doing a gun choreography, where they're flipping their guns back and forth. And there's probably 20 Marines moving through this really intricate choreography, and the song playing in the background, I believe, is Semper Fidelis, and it builds this idea of order in the midst of chaos. This idea that no matter what happens, the Marines will be in perfect unison, will be in perfect lockstep with one another as they move throughout this movie, and that sets up the core tension of the film, which is what happens when you have that sort of unity come into, fly in the face of a character like Lieutenant Daniel Kaffee. And what's going to happen when the Marines have to eat their own, where they're no longer able to work in lockstep anymore. And so I think that opening scene is Reiner setting the stage for everything that's to come. And I found myself really impressed by it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I do really like that opening scene, wordless and, without a score. Like, you're right. It's just the marching band. I thought when you said that you were talking about the opening scene, I thought you were talking about the very opening, which is where they show Santiago get attacked.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to say that the few times that it seems like Reiner / Sorkin / William Goldman, who did a touch-up on this screenplay, do anything that's outside of what I think would be in that play. You know what I mean? Like, there's just a couple moments where they kind of cut away to something else, or they do like a flashback. There's only a few scenes like that in the movie. And I honestly think that they're the only few things that kind of date the movie. Like, the way that scene is filmed, the very first scene where you see the attack, it just looks like a movie from 1992. The way that the slow-mo works and the sound effects, and like it just looks so dated. And the rest of the movie feels like it hasn't aged a day. And so that's part
except for the score.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the score is terrible. Dun, 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 dun.
Dude, I don't know what it is about the 90s and their use of not quite synth piano. I don't even know what you would call it.
It is. It's like synthy, for sure.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's so bad. I want this movie to be remade just so that it has a normal score, orchestral score, because this movie would be kick-ass if it had one.
Well, so, okay, that's a great point. But to the extent that it affects Reiner, I guess what I'm saying is, the few times that it actually seems like Reiner is trying to do something a little artistic or do something that's not just strictly on the page, it also seems like he's kind of caught up in whatever was really popular at the moment. And those are the moments of the film that seem to date it. And it was the same thing with Misery. We talked about all of his little weird, cheesy flourishes in the first half of that movie before he just kind of took a back seat in the second half to the script. And then the movie got a lot better.
And I think that in Misery, it worked a little bit better because I don't know if this sounds bad. For those of you who are fans of horror movies, I apologize. But when you're writing a horror thriller, I feel like it's almost expected to have some of those cheesy moments that set up the movie. Whereas when you have it in a really serious legal courtroom drama, for me, they detracted a lot more. And I'm with you, that opening scene, I don't know, I've watched a lot of NCIS with my wife, to the point where this movie just feels like an extended episode of NCIS.
Yeah.
With some things changed, but that opening, oh no, here's the mystery that the team's going to solve for the rest of the show. Like, that's what that felt like. And yeah, I didn't watch TV in 1992, being, 1 to 2 years old. So I don't know if that was a thing before then. Maybe A Few Good Men set the stage for all legal television dramas for the next 20, 30 years. But it didn't work great for me either.
Yeah, there's definitely, I will say, this movie, I think, really is on the forefront of that, because every military tribunal TV show that comes after it, or even just courtroom drama, like Law and Order, follows this same structure, right? Like the murder happens, and then Lenny Briscoe says something smart alecky, and then da-dum, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Like, it's just the way that these things work. But I think that this is one of those instances where we've had 30 years of copycats come after this movie. And so it's a little unfair to read back into this movie the copycats and to hold the copycats against this movie. And I think that's where Sorkin's script really, really shines, because at the end of the day, this is still 10 times better than any episode of NCIS I've ever seen. And it's because of that script.
Yeah, easily. And you got Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson.
You got Tom.
No offense to Mark Harmon, but
all right. So let's go to break here in just a minute. But as a send-off to the first half of the episode, and in honor of Aaron Sorkin, Brad, the script is famous for the "you can't handle the truth" line. But I'm wondering, Brad, aside from that line, what is a standout line from the movie for you? Because there was at least one for me that as I was watching it, I was like, oh, shit, that is a good line, and wrote it down just specifically to talk about.
I really love when Galloway comes to talk to Kaffee, and she tells him that she doesn't think he's fit to handle the defense. And he goes, "You don't even know me. Ordinarily, it takes someone hours to discover I'm not fit to handle a defense." And there's like so many little moments like that that Cruise's comic ability just shines. And I think that it's those little moments where I really actually appreciate Demi's and Tom's chemistry. But yeah, that was one of the lines that stood out to me.
Well, and I think that's really indicative of the fact that Sorkin is a student of movie scripts. Like, that is the kind of line that Cary Grant would deliver in Arsenic and Old Lace, or, you know what I mean? Like in a 1930s screwball comedy. That's exactly the kind of punchline you're going for.
It kind of feels like a Billy Wilder, like Jack Lemmon throwaway type of thing.
100%. I think for me, there's a line that is on the more dramatic side, but it's also, I guess, I don't know what to call it. What do you call a dramatic punchline, Brad? I don't know.
I can't
I'm
think
just
of
going to keep calling it a payoff line, because the whole scene builds to it. And it's a moment between Kevin Pollak and Demi Moore where she asks him, "Why do you hate these guys so much?" And he goes on this rant.
Dude.
He goes on this rant about, like, they have dishonored the Marines and blah, 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 blah. And then she starts walking away, and he says, "Why do you like them so much?" And again, it's like, this is like the formula for how to write a script. So much so that, like, in anyone else's hands, this scene would be excruciatingly bad. But he says, "Why do you like them so much?" And she wheels around and just looks at him in the eyes and says, "Because they stand on a wall and say, 'Nothing's going to hurt you tonight. Not on my watch.'" And then she walks away. And I was like, holy shit. What an incredible line. Like, that's the kind of line that someone delivers and you're like, Demi Moore, I don't think you're great in this movie, but if you wanted to campaign for an Oscar, that's your Oscar clip right there. Yeah. That's exactly what that line is for. And it works.
Can I ask you, though, and, obviously things were different between Cuba and the U.S. in 1992 than they are now. Was the premise believable? Because I feel like they just constantly, like, build it up like Nathan R. Jessup. And at the very least, I believe that he believes this. But like they believe that nuclear Armageddon could ensue if they don't properly, walk along that wall. And if he wears his officer's uniform, then he's going to get shot by a Cuban. And I'm like, I don't know what things were like back then, but I don't feel like the Cubans were just ready to be like, hey, let's go shoot an American officer and cause a war between us and America. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I don't think, especially like post fall of the Berlin Wall and, and Gorbachev and like the USSR is cooling off. Cuba's not a threat to America at this point. However, I think it says a lot about what Sorkin is trying to get at with Jessup, right? That if you're in the military, you have to be convinced that you are protecting America from any impending threat, right? And on this base, the impending threat is right outside their gates. And whether or not it is a legitimate threat, Jessup has convinced the people on this base that it is a legitimate threat. And I think his sway over everyone underneath him is crucial to the premise of the movie. Like, the Code Red doesn't happen if those guys aren't 100% on board with what Jessup is selling. So for me, like, even if the like geopolitical aspect of it doesn't work so much, I think what it all boils down to still does.
Well, I guess, and that was kind of my question then in the end, like, do you think that Sorkin tried to keep that reality as a premise to make, Jessup appear more delusional?
Oh, good. Like Brando in Apocalypse Now, kind of.
Yeah. Honestly,
yeah.
Tell me that there's not certain, I don't know, comparisons between Brando and him.
That's true, because you could have just easily set this on a base that was closer to Russia or closer, we're in Desert Storm at this point, right? So why not set it overseas? I think that would make more sense. But yeah, it's a good point. I think maybe you're onto something there.
Oh, well, I think we need to get onto this Nomad whiskey, Bob.
Dude, I cannot wait. Let's get to it.
Film and Whiskey Nation, do you ever think about awards? Of course you do. You drink whiskey and watch movies, which means that you know that nothing is validated until a group of random people say, hey, we love what you're doing. The awesome thing about Doc Swinson's whiskey is that it isn't just some group of schlubs that are giving them awards. They have been winning attention from some of the most important whiskey experts that you can imagine. They've been voted best distillery in Washington State by the New York International Spirits Competition. They've been voted the best independent bottler by the Ascot Awards, as well as the best finished bourbon from the Ascot Awards for their La Menta Exploratory Cask. Their Exploratory Cask series is where they release some of the most fascinating and adventurous experiments. If you're ever checking out Doc's lineup and see a white label, there's a really good chance that that's the only time you'll see that bottle, so make sure you snatch it up. Doc Swinson's has been offering just phenomenal finished and blended whiskeys for quite some time now. You can find them online at docswhiskey.com. That's DOCS whiskey.com.
All right, so today we are checking out Nomad Outland Whisky. Brad, this is a bottle that I picked up when my family took a little weekend vacation to the Finger Lakes, and we were, all over New York State and up in the Buffalo area, and I happened to stop into a liquor store that had this on the shelf, and it is one of the coolest looking bottles in my collection now. And then I looked at the bottom of it, and it was $35, and I said, you know what? I don't know a thing about this. I'm just going to take a chance. And I bought it, and it has been sitting on my shelf for about a year. I have not cracked it yet. And so we're drinking this together, and this is the first that I've had of it. I gave you a full half of this bottle, which is unlike me, because I try to hoard my whiskey and not share with you. But I gave you half of it, so I'm hoping that it's really, really good. This is a blended Scotch whiskey. It's a blend of over 30 malt and grain Scotch whiskeys, blended by the master blender from White and Mackay named Richard Patterson, who's like a really, really famous whiskey blender. Like, if you look up anything on YouTube, if you just type in whiskey blending, he's the first guy that comes up on there. And so this is a product of this master blender, and it's aged for 5 years in sherry butts. And then it is shipped over to Spain and aged for an additional year in PX casks. So this is like extra sherry finished scotch. I'm pretty pumped about it, man.
Why do you think that they call it sherry butts, but everything else it's barrels?
Well, so it has to do with the size of the barrel, first of all. Like a butt is a particular size of barrel.
Okay.
Yeah, when you get into like reading about different casks, it's really interesting because the shapes are slightly different, the volumes are different. I know that Laphroaig makes a variant that's called Laphroaig quarter cask, and it's aged in really, really small barrels that are quarter cask sized. So, yeah, there's a whole terminology, but we haven't come up against any butts on this podcast except for sherry butts. So, yeah.
I was going to say, I feel like the only time I ever hear the term butt is with sherry. So I just figured it was a weird, like, layover from some ancient term or something.
Nah, just butt.
Just butt.
Just a butt. All right, so this is clocking in at 82.6 proof, so pretty low proof. It does have color added to it, which is typical for scotches. Scotch does not make any sort of regulation that you can't add coloration to it. So it has a really nice, almost bourbon-y color to it, but that's because they've added some caramel coloring to it. Brad, we have it poured out here in front of us. What are you picking up on the nose of this Nomad Outland Whisky?
Man, this is like incredibly grape forward. It almost like, to me, it almost smells like grape drink. like not Welch's grape juice. Like, just kind of smells like grape drink.
Plastic jug
yes.
Grape drink. Yeah.
Yep. There's a little bit of cherry, some orange creamsicle. I start to get the barley as I sit with it for a while. And then at the very end, after being in the glass for a bit, I got a little bit of cinnamon going on, just a tiny bit of spiciness that I really enjoyed. I think I'll give it an 8 out of 10 on the nose, Bob.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think I'm going to give a 7.5 on the nose. It doesn't smell like inexpensive blended scotch. Like, I literally just had some Cutty Sark the other night, and Cutty Sark is phenomenal for $14. This does not smell like that, and it may just be that the sherry butts have rounded off the sharp edges of this, but this smells more like in line with something that we would try, like a Glenmorangie. You know what I mean? Like, it just has that really sort of like softness and roundness to it. It's not super complex, and it still does smell a little bit flat, if I'm being honest, but it smells good. So I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah. And then, Bob, I got into the taste of this thing. Bob, I'm going to say this very, very slowly. This is a 10 out of 10 on taste.
This is delicious. Oh my gosh. There's like,
bro,
there's so many layers to this. So, okay. On the tip of my tongue, it's blended scotch, right? It's Cutty Sark, it's whatever you want. Actually, it probably tastes closer to an Irish whiskey than a scotch to me. Like,
yeah,
it tastes really similar to that Bushmills we had a few weeks ago. And then about halfway back on the palate, you start to get that sherry finish coming out pretty significantly. You go to swallow, I get some like really dark, almost Concord grape kind of elements to it. And then as soon as you swallow, it is like when you crack open a fresh bag of brown sugar, dark brown sugar. And it's just like, hey, do you remember bourbon? Here's a reminder of bourbon at the very end of this sherry finished scotch. And it's just a wave of brown sugar and then like pure maple syrup for me.
Yeah,
Brad,
I was
this
going to say,
fantastic, dude.
It's absolutely incredible. For me, what stuck with me was how like on my lips tasted like a cherry candy, like a cherry cordial. The flavor that sticks around is incredible. There's all sorts of brown sugar on the back end, like you said. There's those hints of barley that hit you throughout that remind you that this is a scotch. And not like in a bad way. Like, it's like, hey, here's like a palette of sweets, and there's this nice little foundation of barley underneath that holds it all together. I think this is an incredible palette, Bob.
Wow, I just poured a second pour of this. That's how much I like it. And once you taste it, it's like an obvious thing to say, but like now that I've tasted the brown sugar, I'm going back to the nose, and there's brown sugar all over the nose on this now. Like, it is... Man, this is good. Let's talk finish here. The finish is not I don't know what the word is. It's long lasting. It's very, very sweet. It's like candy sweet.
Mm-hmm.
There's no chest burn at all going down for me. So like there's not much of a reminder that you had whiskey in terms of like alcohol burn.
Yeah.
But the finish is very mouthwatering. I wouldn't call it super long. I'd definitely call it like a more medium finish. But if you like sweet whiskeys the way that I do, this is like a dream finish for an 82 proof whiskey. I think I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 on the finish, Brad.
Yeah, I'll give it an 8.5. I think that, like I said, the barley kind of sticks around. There's some orange. It's creamy. It goes back into that really heavy grape drink flavor. Mm-hmm. And then it's almost like a burnt sugar, almost like a creme brulee.
Yeah.
That is just beautiful the way it sticks around. And I'm in love with this whiskey, man.
I'm going to say this now, dude. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this may not be, if all else is equal, this may not be the best whiskey we have this season. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't rank this up there with like the best BTAC we've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to get to value in a minute. But even setting that aside, this may end up being my favorite whiskey of the season, because I just tried it knowing nothing about it. And I can already say I am trying to find a bottle of it now so that I can continue to have this on my shelf whenever I run out of this. Like, from now on, as long as I can find it, there will be a bottle of this whiskey on my shelf.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. It kind of reminds me of like why I like to watch movies without knowing anything about them. Where you're like, yeah, you look at the bottom and you're like, sure, blended scotch, let's try it. PX finish, great. Oh my gosh, Bob.
Yeah.
This is great. I think balance score, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. The nose and finish are like solid above average, but it's paired with one of the best palates I've ever had. And so I think it's pretty easy to say that even though this isn't an incredibly complex whiskey, and I think that kind of bumps the score down a tiny bit as well, you like once you've tasted it, you know what you're getting, and it's incredible, man.
Yeah, I actually think just because of that fact, I'm going to give this a 9.5 on balance. So the only thing that stood out to me as being lesser than the rest of it is the nose, but it's not because the nose was, I think I said flat the first time around. And I think that I would probably amend that to say it's almost like it was playing its cards really close to the chest or close to the vest, whatever the saying is. Like it seems like it was trying to not give itself away. When you go back for a second nosing of this, everything that's on the palate is there. And it's just beautiful, man. Like, I think this is a superbly well-balanced whiskey. It's a 9.5 for me. And that takes us to value. Now, unfortunately, this is not for sale in the state of Ohio. So I know, right? So we have to look elsewhere. And this is selling at weird price points all around the internet. So I saw this for sale as high as $200 somewhere, which is outrageous, which leads me to believe that maybe this has been discontinued. And I certainly hope not, because I need to get it for the rest of my life. But in the places where I'm actually seeing it in stock, like I'm looking at some Binny's locations out in the Chicagoland area, it looks like it's about $40 there. And like I said, I got it last year in New York for $36. So, I mean, let's just call it $40. If you can find this anywhere near you, I expect that you would be paying around $40 retail for this. This is a 10 out of 10, Brad. I have nothing else to say. It's just, I can't think of a better $40 whiskey than this.
Yeah, this is insane value in the world of scotch. 10 out of 10 for me. Bob, that brings my total to a 44.5 out of 50.
I'm at a 46 out of 50. This is one of the highest rated whiskeys I've ever had on this show. That brings us to a 90.5 out of 100. We finally hit the 90 mark again, Brad.
Hey, let's go.
Or a 45.25 out of 50. Dude, I'm so happy. I had no idea what this was going to be like. I had never heard of, like, Brad, we've had so much whiskey, and I'm on whiskey Instagram all the time. I have never seen this bottle. I have never heard of this bottle. This was a complete blind buy. To be honest, I gave you half of it because I was worried it would suck, and I wanted to move some product off my shelf. It's phenomenal. I can't recommend this highly enough.
Yeah, go find a bottle of Nomad Outland. It is spectacular whiskey that honestly, you should pull out and drink while you're watching A Few Good Men, a spectacular movie.
Well, let's get back into talking about that movie, Brad. What do you say?
Let's get to it, Bob. All right, everybody, that was Nomad Outland Whisky, finished in heaven, I think.
Yeah, for sure. That was, Brad, like, I have lost my ability to speak in a coherent way.
Well, hopefully that continues as we get into Two Facts and a Falsehood.
2 Facts and a Falsehood, where Brad tries to stump me by presenting 3 items as fact, one of which he has completely made up, and it is up to me to decide which of these facts is actually a falsehood.
I feel like when you get it wrong, I need to just be like, boom, stumped.
Lawyered.
Lawyered.
All right, Brad, hit me with your 3 facts, supposed facts, about A Few Good Men.
Alrighty, Bob. Fact number 1. An unnamed executive gave Aaron Sorkin this note: if Tom Cruise and Demi Moore aren't going to sleep with each other, why is Demi Moore a woman? He responded, I said the obvious answer. Women have purposes other than to sleep with Tom Cruise. Fact number 2, with Jack Nicholson only being on set for 10 days, Reiner wanted to make sure that the final bits of the trial scene were perfect, so he shot those scenes right away, making it the first scenes shot in the movie. Fact number 3, the word sir is used 164 times during the movie, which makes it an average of once every 50 seconds.
I think 3 is true. I mean, those 2 Marines say sir all the freaking time, and I was as annoyed with it as Tom Cruise was. One sound
but they use that word so with such versatility.
Yeah.
To express contempt, to respect, disappointment, frustration. Like, it's incredible.
1 also sounds plausible. 2, I mean, obviously sounds like it could be plausible, but I don't know if Nicholson was available at the start of the shoot. Like, I'm sure that they spent the majority of his time shooting those scenes, but like, was that the first thing in the whole movie that was shot? I don't know. I'm gonna say 1 is true. I'm gonna assume 3 is true. So I'll say 2 is the falsehood here, Brad.
Bob, you are 100% correct.
Yeah.
Right. You handled the truth.
Yes, I did. Oh man. Oh, that was a really relatively painless one today.
Yeah, that was good.
Going back to your comment about the 2 Marines saying sir with so much contempt and everything else, my other favorite part of this movie is right at the end when Tom Cruise has finally won the respect of the one guy, and he turns around and salutes him, and then says, 10 Hut, there's an officer on deck. And I'm not going to lie, I cried a little bit.
Oh, dude, it's so cheesy.
It's so cheesy.
So
I don't know why
effective.
it was so effective, because I was like, this is horrible. This is what they teach you not to do in screenwriting classes. But also, you know what it reminded me of is that famous scene in To Kill a Mockingbird, which Sorkin has now done an adaptation of. And yeah, it's been running on Broadway for like the last year or two.
Oh, nice.
But you know, when the Reverend says to Scout and Jem, you know, stand up, your father's passing. And it's just like, what a line, right?
Yeah.
This is his version of that. And for me, as cheesy as it is, it works.
I was going to say, at the very start of this episode, you mentioned how this movie is like an 8.5, and then the final bits of the courtroom scene are they just take it to a whole nother level. And it honestly made me think of To Kill a Mockingbird, which made me start wondering, are all courtroom movies average until the very end? And there's something about either justice being served or like a miscarriage of justice that just hits at the human soul in a way that most movies don't.
I think there's just something so inherently dramatic about the courtroom, right? This is why Law and Order works. Law and Order wouldn't work if it was called Order and Law. Like if the courtroom stuff came first and then the police investigative stuff was the second part of the episode, that show would suck. Like, there's something about watching people in a confined space argue with each other and build a case, and it builds this mounting tension to the point where there's some sort of a smoking gun and they say, ha, and that's how the person gets found out, right? Like there's just something, and maybe it's just because I'm a dad now and this is like perfect dad movie fodder, but I will never say no to a well-made courtroom drama.
Yeah, I think that it just has a certain... There's just a reality that humans like resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And like a gavel being banged on the judge's, whatever it's... What do they call the thing that you bang it on?
It's just called a block, isn't it?
A block.
Yeah.
The gavel being, just hammered onto the block.
The gavel being gavelled.
Being gavelled. The gavellinations of the film. This is going way off base, Bob.
Yep.
All I gotta say is, when the movie finally ends and the sentence is read and the gavel is hammered, like, it's just, there's something about that feels so satisfying, and the finality of it is just good for the human soul. And I think that's why courtroom dramas just work.
All right, speaking of other lines that are really great in this movie, that last line that Tom Cruise says to Jack Nicholson, where he just says, "Don't call me son. I'm a lawyer, and I'm an officer in the United States Navy, and you're under arrest, you son of a b***." Like, it's so good.
It's amazing. Because, like, in that moment, he's been fighting, being a lawyer for the military the entire movie. And he finally, like, stands up to the occasion, realizes who he is, and just delivers that line with such tenacity. And, oh, dude, it's so good.
All right, Brad, it's time for us to make this a double. I think we've already kind of hinted at two movies that would be really, really good pairings to go with A Few Good Men. Do you want to stick with To Kill a Mockingbird, or do you have something else in mind?
Oh, no, Bob. Do I have something else in mind? I have another courtroom drama from the year 1992 about a lawyer who has never actually practiced law in the courtroom. Do you know what movie I'm talking about?
I do not.
My cousin
Vinny.
There
it is.
I'm going to pair this with My Cousin Vinny, Bob.
It's a great movie. Like, there's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, that's an Oscar-winning film.
Yeah, it sure is. And it's Joe Pesci just being perfect.
Being Joe Pesci.
Yeah.
I also love that it's like Joe Pesci in peak toupee mode.
Oh, yes.
You know?
Yes.
That's a great pick. I think I am going to pair this with Shawshank, and it's for a lot of reasons. I think one of them being that this has that episodic feel to it, that it's a perfect cable movie where every 20 minutes you take a little break. There's a nice little button on the end of a scene that's a great line, and they say that line and then you go to commercial break and you come back and you're in another location. It works that way. It has that very early to mid 90s feel to it. And I know that, like, nothing I'm saying is really tangible or substantial, but these movies just have a really similar vibe to them. Right down to how in Shawshank, Morgan Freeman's narration doesn't really sound like how people actually talk. They sound like how people talk in the movies. And I think there's something to be said about a movie that is self-aware enough to know how people talk in the movies. And Sorkin does it so well here. And for all the problems I have with Shawshank, like, I think it's a really good movie. I don't know if it's like a great movie. It does that really well. And so I think that watching this and Shawshank back to back would just be one of those, hey, I'm going to watch two movies in a row that are like guaranteed to be a 9 out of 10 experience. And I'm just going to fully embrace dad mode on a Saturday afternoon in the fall watching AMC or whatever it is. And I think you'd have a good time.
If I had to give Shawshank a let's make it a double, I think I'd have to go with Green Mile.
Well, sure.
I feel like those two movies are the same movie, but just slightly different.
I mean, same director, same author. Yeah, they really are the same movie.
Oh, I honestly didn't know that.
Yeah.
All I knew is that I'd seen them both and felt like they were the same movie.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're both Stephen King adaptations by Frank Darabont. Like,
there you go.
Yep. So going back to our thing about Scorsese making the same movie over and over.
Nailed it.
All right, so those are our two picks for Let's Make It a Double. I like them both, man. And you could throw in To Kill a Mockingbird and make it a triple, I guess.
Yeah, if you want to spend like 8 hours, 9 hours watching
courtroom dramas,
just 3 courtroom dramas, that's it, man.
All right, Brad, it's time for our final scores. I'm wavering between a 9 and a 9.5 because this is not a perfect movie. And there are parts of it where I'm like, this is not even really a great movie. And certain characters are just caricatures. And there are many, many times where the dialogue is cheesy. And yet, it just works. I don't know that I would put this in like my top 100 American movies ever, but I would definitely put it in the best screenplays ever written. It's like an airtight screenplay. And if we're going to say that we love dialogue by people like Billy Wilder, who know how people talk in the movies and not in real life, Sorkin's really, really damn good at that. And this is a prime example. I think I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10, Brad.
Man, yeah, I think I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. For most of the movie, I was sitting around an 8, 8.5. Those final few scenes, man, just rocketed up to a 9.5. And then there's the officer on deck 10 hut, and that brings it back down to a 9 for me. So, yeah,
let it be known this Veterans Day, Film and Whiskey Nation, that somebody saluting an officer in the United States Navy is something that Brad dings, holds against the film.
Yeah, it's an automatic half-point deduction, Bob.
Saluting an officer, boo.
I think at this point, Film and Whiskey Nation knows that if there's anybody who has respect for our military, Bob,
it's me. It's Bob Book.
Definitely going to be me.
All right. Well, we do want to say Veterans Day is this Friday, and we do want to thank anyone in our audience who is a veteran who has served in any capacity in the armed forces. This is a movie that I think on its surface, Brad, might seem like a weird pick for Veterans Day. I mean, seriously, though.
Considering the way it shits all over the military.
But it doesn't, though, because I'm trying to make a serious point. Like, I think that it's also a movie about what it means to have integrity in an institution like the military. And when you look at it from the point of view of somebody like Tom Cruise, who earns the respect of everybody around him by understanding what it actually means to be an officer in the military. Like, I think that it is, I don't know. I think it's a really effective movie. And maybe I'll leave it at that as you continue to crap on our armed forces.
I am not crapping on our armed forces. If anything, I think that Sorkin probably is, just taking a guess at people who live in the world of New York, Broadway and LA Hollywood. I'm guessing he's left of center, to put it nicely. I would imagine that he wrote this movie with a bent against a certain type of person in the military, maybe not against the whole military. Who knows? I'm not in the guy's head. But I personally would think that he meant this as a scathing polemic against certain types of people in the military. Huh. And I don't know if he gets it totally right. Because I don't know if there's very many Colonel Nathan R. Jessups out there. But I could be wrong. Maybe there are. Maybe our military friends can call in and be like, no, he kind of hit the nail on the head. Who knows, man? I
think this is a great question to ask our audience. When you watch this movie, do you view this movie more as in praise of the people who stick up for the little guy, or a movie that is intending to condemn those in power? And I think the way that you answer that question really does inform how you watch this movie. And so I'd like to hear from Film and Whiskey Nation on that. You can find us on all of our social media accounts: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Film Whiskey.
Or you can join our Discord. We are on our Discord every single day talking to you guys. And put simply, Discord is just a really cool social media space that is curated with only the people and content that you want to talk to and talk about. So jump on there. You can find a link to it at the end of every one of our show notes.
Next week, we are following Rob Reiner into another genre. Yet again, we're going back a few years into the 1980s to look at a movie that a lot of people say has a perfect script, and that is William Goldman's The Princess Bride. So we'll be watching that next week. Join us for that. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.